I miss you. Those 3 words glowed on my husband's phone screen like a warning flare in the middle of our quiet Sunday afternoon. I stood frozen in the living room, staring at the notification that had just appeared while Brian was in the kitchen making his famous chicken parmesan. The message was from someone named Julia, and the little heart emoji at the end of her name in his contacts told me everything I needed to know. My name is Jennifer, and I am 32 years old. I have been married to Brian for 7 years, and until that moment, I thought I knew exactly what my life looked like. We lived in a modest but comfortable home in Nashville, Tennessee, the kind of place with a wraparound porch and enough space for the 2 children we had been talking about having someday. I worked as a project manager for a furniture manufacturing company called Oakenlight Publishing, handling logistics and client relations. Brian worked as a sales representative for a medical equipment distributor, a job that required him to travel occasionally and work late more often than I would have liked. The signs had been there for weeks. I had noticed the way he started keeping his phone face down on every surface. The way he would step outside to take calls, claiming the reception was better on the porch. The way he had suddenly become more attentive in the mornings, kissing my forehead before leaving for work, as if trying to convince both of us that everything was fine. I had noticed the new cologne, the gym membership he actually started using, the careful way he deleted his text messages every night before bed. I had told myself I was being paranoid. I had told myself that 7 years of marriage meant something, that the vows we exchanged in that little church downtown were stronger than my insecurities. I had told myself that Brian loved me, that he would never betray the life we had built together. But standing there with his phone in my hand, watching Julia's message light up the screen, I realized I had been lying to myself for longer than I wanted to admit. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Julia appeared below the first one. I can't stop thinking about last night. My stomach dropped. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating, and I had to grip the edge of the coffee table to steady myself. Last night, Brian had told me he was working late on a presentation for an important client meeting. He had come home around 11, smelling faintly of something floral that was not my perfume, and he had kissed me on the cheek before crawling into bed beside me. I had believed him. I had believed every single word. From the kitchen, I could hear him humming along to the radio, completely unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. The scent of garlic and tomatoes drifted through the house, a cruel reminder of the domestic life I had thought we were building. He was making me dinner. He was standing in our kitchen, cooking for his wife, while his mistress sent him love notes on his phone. I took a deep breath and made a decision that would change everything. Instead of confronting him immediately, instead of screaming or crying or throwing his phone against the wall, I did something that surprised even me. I picked up his phone, typed in his passcode that he thought I did not know, and opened the message thread with Julia. The conversation stretched back for months. Months of flirtation, of late-night exchanges, of plans made, and secrets kept. I scrolled through the messages with a growing sense of numbness, watching their relationship unfold in tiny digital fragments. Pet names I had never heard him use, promises about a future that did not include me, complaints about his wife who did not understand him, who was too focused on work, who had let herself go. That last one stung more than the rest. I had gained 15 pounds since our wedding, true, but I had also worked 60-hour weeks to help pay off his student loans. I had sacrificed my own dreams of going back to school so that we could buy this house. I had done everything I thought a good wife was supposed to do, and this was what I got in return. Julia was 25 years old. I could see her profile picture in the corner of the screen, a young woman with dark hair and bright eyes, and the kind of confident smile that came from not knowing how cruel the world could be. She worked in the same office as Brian, handling administrative tasks, and apparently handling my husband as well. According to their messages, they had been sleeping together for 3 months. I heard Brian's footsteps approaching from the kitchen, and I quickly locked the phone and set it back on the coffee table exactly where he had left it. He appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel, looking every bit the devoted husband. "Dinner will be ready in about 20 minutes, he said with a smile. "You want to open a bottle of wine?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered how I had missed the lies hiding behind those familiar brown eyes. "Sure," I said, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. "That sounds perfect." He disappeared back into the kitchen, and I picked up his phone again. This time, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I typed the response slowly, carefully choosing each word with the precision of someone defusing a bomb. My fingers trembled slightly over the screen, but my mind was eerily calm, like the eye of a hurricane. "Come by tonight. My wife's out visiting her sister. I'll leave the door unlocked." I stared at the message for a long moment before hitting send. Part of me could not believe what I was doing, but another part, a deeper and angrier part, knew that this was the only way to get the truth out in the open. I was tired of suspicions and half-answers. I was tired of lying in bed next to a man who was lying to my face every single day. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I wanted to watch them try to explain themselves when there was nowhere left to hide. The response came almost immediately, a string of excited emojis followed by a simple, "See you at 7." I checked the time. It was 4:30 in the afternoon, which gave me 2.5 hours to prepare for the confrontation that would end my marriage. I set the phone back down and walked into the kitchen, where Brian was stirring a pot of marinara sauce with the concentration of a man who believed he had gotten away with everything. "Actually," I said, leaning against the doorframe, "I just remembered I was supposed to drop some paperwork off at my sister's house tonight. Do you mind if I run over there after dinner?" Brian's face brightened in a way that made my stomach turn. "Of course not. Take your time. I'll probably just catch up on some work emails anyway." Work emails. The audacity of the lie was almost impressive. I nodded and smiled, playing the role of the oblivious wife one last time. Dinner was surreal. We sat across from each other at the dining room table, eating the meal he had prepared, making small talk about nothing important. He told me about a difficult client he was dealing with. I told him about a shipping delay that had caused problems at work. We discussed the weather, the neighbors, the leaky faucet in the bathroom that he kept promising to fix. It was the most mundane conversation of our marriage, and also the most devastating. Every time he smiled at me, I thought about Julia's messages. Every time he reached across the table to refill my wine glass, I thought about the hands that had touched another woman's body. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, waiting for the moment when I could put my plan into action. At 6:15, I pushed back from the table and carried my plate to the sink. "I should head over to my sister's place before it gets too late," I said, keeping my voice casual. "I might stay for a cup of tea, so don't wait up for me." Brian stood and kissed me on the forehead, the same gesture he had been using for weeks as a smokescreen for his guilt. "Drive safe," he said. "Tell Melissa I said hello." I grabbed my purse and my keys and walked out the front door, but I did not drive to my sister's house. Instead, I pulled my car around the corner, parked in the shadow of a large oak tree, and waited. The sky was beginning to darken, painting the Nashville suburbs in shades of orange and purple. I watched our house through my rearview mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. At 6:45, I saw Brian step out onto the porch and look up and down the street, checking to make sure I was really gone. He went back inside, and I imagined him rushing around the house, hiding any evidence of my presence, making everything perfect for his guest. The thought made bile rise in my throat. At 6:55, I got out of my car and walked back toward my own home. I moved quietly, keeping to the shadows, circling around to the side entrance that led through the garage. I had a key to the interior door, and I let myself in without making a sound. The house was dim, lit only by the soft glow of candles that Brian had arranged in the living room. Candles. He had never lit candles for me. I positioned myself in the hallway, just out of sight of the front door, but close enough to see everything. My hands were shaking, but my resolve was absolute. I had spent 7 years building a life with this man, and I deserved to know exactly what he had been doing behind my back. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. I watched through the shadows as Brian smoothed down his shirt and walked to the front door with an eager smile on his face. He opened it wide, and there she stood. Julia was wearing a tight red skirt that barely reached mid-thigh and a black blouse unbuttoned just low enough to suggest everything without revealing anything. Her dark hair was styled in loose waves, and her lips were painted the same shade of crimson as her skirt. She looked like she had spent hours getting ready for this moment, this secret rendezvous in my home. "I've been thinking about you all day," she purred, stepping across the threshold and reaching up to touch Brian's chest. He grabbed her hand and pulled her inside, glancing nervously over his shoulder toward the empty driveway. "Get in here before someone sees you." They stood together in my living room, in front of my couch, beneath the wedding portrait that hung on my wall. Julia wrapped her arms around his neck and leaned in for a kiss. And that was when I stepped out of the shadows. "Actually," I said, my voice slicing through the romantic atmosphere like a blade, "someone already has." The look on Brian's face in that moment was something I will never forget. The color drained from his skin so quickly that I thought he might faint. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out, just a strangled sound that might have been my name or might have been a prayer. Julia, for her part, stumbled backward in her heels, nearly tripping over the coffee table in her rush to put distance between herself and my husband. "Jennifer," Brian finally managed, his voice cracking on every syllable. "What are you doing here? You were supposed to be at your sister's house." I crossed my arms over my chest and leaned against the doorframe, studying them both with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining specimens under a microscope. "Change of plans," I said calmly. "I thought I would come home and surprise my husband. Imagine my surprise when I found out he already had company." Julia's eyes were wide with panic, darting between Brian and me like a trapped animal looking for an escape route. "This isn't what it looks like," she stammered. "I just came by to drop off some work files. Brian said you were out of town, and I thought it would be okay to stop." The single word cut through her rambling like a knife. I held up Brian's phone, which I had retrieved from the coffee table before taking my position in the hallway. I read the messages, all of them, so please don't insult my intelligence by trying to pretend this is something innocent. The silence that followed was deafening. Julia's face crumpled into an expression of pure terror, while Brian stood frozen beside her, looking like a man who had just watched his entire life implode. The candles he had lit flickered in the still air, casting dancing shadows across the walls of our living room. "Jennifer, please," Brian said, taking a step toward me with his hands raised in supplication. "Let me explain. It's not what you think. Julia and I were just friends. We work together. Sometimes we text each other, but it doesn't mean anything. You're blowing this completely out of proportion." I laughed, and the sound was cold even to my own ears. "Just friends? Friends who miss each other? Friends who can't stop thinking about last night?" I scrolled through the message thread and began reading aloud. "I love the way your hands feel on my skin. I can't wait until we can be together for real. When are you going to tell her the truth?" Each word landed like a physical blow. Brian flinched with every sentence, his face cycling through shame, anger, and finally a desperate kind of denial. Julia had backed herself against the wall, her arms wrapped around her midsection as if trying to hold herself together. "Those messages were taken out of context," Brian tried. "We were just joking around. It was flirting, okay? I admit it was inappropriate, but nothing actually happened. I never touched her. I never—" "3 months," I interrupted. "According to your messages, you've been sleeping together for 3 months. You told her you loved her on October 15th. You promised her you would leave me by Christmas, and you complained that I was too fat, too boring, too focused on my career to give you what you needed." I paused, letting each accusation sink in. Did I miss anything? Or would you like to keep lying to me? Brian's facade finally cracked, His shoulders slumped, and his head dropped forward in defeat. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. Yes, Julia and I have been seeing each other. But it didn't start because I don't love you. It started because things between us have been hard, and she was there, and I made a mistake. I made a terrible mistake. A mistake that lasted 3 months," I said flatly. I know it's bad. But I can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. I'll end things with Julia right now, tonight, and I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you." He took another step toward me, his eyes pleading. "Please, Jennifer, don't throw away 7 years because of one stupid mistake." I looked at him, really looked at him, and tried to find any trace of the man I had married, the man who had promised to love me in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, forsaking all others until death parted us. But all I could see was a stranger, someone who had been wearing my husband's face while betraying everything we had built. "It wasn't one mistake," I said quietly. "It was hundreds of choices. Every time you texted her instead of talking to me. Every time you lied about where you were. Every time you touched her and then came home and touched me. Those weren't accidents, Brian. Those were decisions. And now I'm making a decision too." I turned to look at Julia, who was still pressed against the wall like she was hoping it would swallow her whole. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and mascara had begun to streak down her cheeks. She looked young and scared and utterly pathetic. "You can have him," I said. "I hope he makes you as happy as he made me." Julia opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She grabbed her purse from where she had dropped it on the floor and fled toward the front door, her heels clicking rapidly against the hardwood. The door slammed behind her, and the sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. Brian and I stood alone in the candlelit living room, surrounded by the ruins of our marriage. He was crying now, tears streaming down his face, and part of me felt a small, vindictive satisfaction at seeing him suffer. But mostly I just felt tired, bone-deep exhausted from years of loving someone who had never really loved me back. "Jennifer," he sobbed, "please, I love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. We can fix this." I shook my head slowly. "No, Brian, we can't, because I don't want to." The next hour was one of the most surreal experiences of my life. Brian tried everything in his arsenal to change my mind, cycling through apologies, excuses, promises, and finally anger when nothing else worked. He paced back and forth across the living room, his hands gesturing wildly as he attempted to rewrite the narrative of his affair into something I could forgive. "You don't understand," he said, for what felt like the 100th time. Julia pursued me. She was aggressive. She kept showing up at my desk, flirting with me, making me feel wanted. "You were always so busy with work, always coming home exhausted, always putting the company before our marriage. I felt invisible in my own home." I sat on the arm of the couch, watching him with an expression of distant curiosity. "So it's my fault," I said. "That's what you're telling me. I made you cheat because I worked too hard." "That's not what I said. I'm saying there were problems in our marriage that we both ignored. I'm saying Julia was a symptom, not the disease. If we had been communicating better, if you had been paying attention to my needs, this never would have happened." The audacity of his words left me momentarily speechless. Here was a man who had been secretly sleeping with a 25-year-old coworker for 3 months, and somehow he had found a way to make himself the victim. I thought about all the nights I had worked late to pay off his student loans. I thought about the vacations we had canceled so he could attend conferences. I thought about the sacrifices I had made, over and over again, because I believed in our future together. "Let me ask you something," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Did Julia know you were married?" Brian stopped pacing and looked at me with confusion. "What?" "Julia. Your girlfriend. Did she know you had a wife at home when she started sleeping with you?" He shifted uncomfortably. I mean, yes, obviously. Everyone at the office knows I'm married. I wear my wedding ring to work every day. So she knew, I repeated. She knew you were married, and she pursued you anyway. And you, knowing that you had made vows to me, decided to pursue her back. Both of you knew exactly what you were doing, and you did it anyway. Brian's face reddened. It's more complicated than that. You're oversimplifying. No, I said firmly. I'm not. You're trying to make this complicated so you don't have to take responsibility. But it's actually very simple. You made a choice. You chose her over me, over and over again for 3 months. And now I'm making a choice too. He stared at me, his expression shifting from defensive to desperate. What are you saying? I'm saying I want a divorce. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and final. Brian's face went through a rapid series of emotions, confusion giving way to disbelief, then to panic, then to something that looked almost like rage. You can't be serious, he said. You're going to throw away our entire marriage because of one affair? People work through these things, Jennifer. Couples survive infidelity all the time. We can go to therapy. We can rebuild trust. I don't want to rebuild anything with you, I interrupted. I spent 7 years building a life with someone I thought I knew, and it turns out I was wrong. Every memory I have of our marriage is now tainted by the knowledge that you were lying to me. Every tender moment, every promise, every plan we made for the future. It's all poisoned, and I refuse to spend the rest of my life trying to clean up your mess. Brian's jaw tightened. This is an overreaction. You're emotional right now. You just found out, and you're not thinking clearly. Let's take some time. Let's sleep on it. In the morning when you've calmed down. I am calm, I said. And it was true. There was a strange serenity in my chest, a quiet certainty that I was doing the right thing. I've never been calmer in my life, and I've already made my decision. I stood up and walked toward the hallway, heading for our bedroom. Brian followed close behind, still talking, still trying to find the magic words that would undo what he had done. But there were no magic words. There was no combination of syllables in any language that could erase 3 months of betrayal. In the bedroom, I pulled a suitcase from the closet and began filling it with clothes and essentials. Brian watched from the doorway, his face a mask of disbelief. Where are you going? To my sister's house. For real this time. Jennifer, please, don't do this. We can talk. We can figure this out. I'll do anything you want. I'll go to therapy. I'll change jobs. I'll never speak to Julia again. Just please don't leave. I paused in my packing and looked at him. Really looked at him. At the man I had loved for nearly a decade. The man I had built my entire life around. He looked small and scared and pathetic, and I realized that I felt nothing but contempt. You had 3 months to think about what you were doing, I said quietly. 3 months to consider how your choices would affect our marriage. 3 months to stop, to confess, to try to make things right. You didn't. You kept lying, kept sneaking around, kept promising her that you would leave me. Well, congratulations. You got your wish. I'm leaving you. I zipped up the suitcase and grabbed my laptop bag from the desk. Brian made one last attempt to block my path, but I pushed past him without a word. I walked down the hallway, through the living room with its ridiculous candles still burning, and out the front door. The night air was cool against my face, a welcome relief from the suffocating tension inside the house. I loaded my things into the trunk of my car and climbed into the driver's seat. Through the window, I could see Brian standing on the porch, watching me with an expression of utter devastation. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. My sister Melissa answered the door before I even finished knocking. She took one look at my face and immediately stepped aside to let me in, no questions asked. That was the thing about Melissa. She always knew when to push and when to simply offer silent support. "Guest room is ready," she said, taking my suitcase from my hand. "I'll put on some coffee." I followed her into the warmth of her kitchen, collapsing into a chair at the small breakfast table. The familiar surroundings, the yellow walls, the slightly crooked cabinet doors, the collection of coffee mugs from every city she had ever visited, wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. This was where I had come after every major crisis in my adult life, from failed job interviews to our mother's funeral 3 years ago. Melissa's house was my safe harbor, the one place in the world where I could fall apart without judgment. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked, setting a steaming mug in front of me. I wrapped my hands around the ceramic, letting the heat seep into my cold fingers. "Brian's been having an affair. Her name is Julia. She works at his office. It's been going on for 3 months. Melissa sat down across from me, her face carefully neutral. "How did you find out?" I told her everything. The suspicious behavior over the past few weeks. The text message that had appeared while Brian was cooking dinner. The trap I had set. Julia showing up in that obscene red skirt. I told her about the confrontation, about Brian's pathetic attempts to shift blame, about my decision to leave. By the time I finished, my coffee had gone cold, and Melissa's expression had shifted from neutral to something that looked remarkably like satisfaction. "Good for you," she said simply. I blinked. "Good for me?" "Yes. Good for you for not staying. Good for you for walking out." So many women would have believed his excuses, would have agreed to counseling, would have convinced themselves that the marriage was worth saving. But you didn't. You saw who he really was, and you left. That takes courage. I had not thought of it as courage. I had thought of it as survival, as self-preservation, as the only possible response to a betrayal so profound that forgiveness seemed impossible. But maybe courage and survival were the same thing sometimes. "I wasted 7 years," I said, the words catching in my throat. 7 years of my life with someone who was capable of this. How did I not see it? How did I miss all the signs? Melissa reached across the table and took my hand. "You didn't waste anything. You loved someone who turned out to be different than you thought. That's not your failure. That's his." We sat in silence for a while, the ticking of the kitchen clock the only sound in the room. I thought about everything that would come next. The divorce proceedings, the division of assets, the explanations to friends and family. It was overwhelming, a mountain of pain and paperwork that I would have to climb one step at a time. "Can I stay here for a while?" I asked. "Just until I figure out my next move?" "You can stay as long as you need. The guest room is yours." I nodded, feeling tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "Thank you. I don't know what I would do without you." Melissa smiled, and for the first time since I had seen Julia's message on Brian's phone, I felt something other than numb devastation. I felt hope, small and fragile, like a seedling pushing through frozen ground, but hope nonetheless. That night, I lay in Melissa's guest bed and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. My phone sat on the nightstand, lighting up every few minutes with text messages and voicemails from Brian. I did not read any of them. I knew what they would say. More apologies, more excuses, more desperate pleas for a second chance. I was not interested in hearing any of it. Instead, I thought about Julia. I wondered if she had gone home to her own apartment after fleeing our house, or if she had called Brian to debrief about the disaster. I wondered if she felt guilty, or if she felt vindicated, if she saw herself as a villain or a victim. I wondered if she had really believed that Brian would leave me for her, or if she had known all along that she was just a temporary distraction. It occurred to me that I should hate her. She had knowingly participated in destroying my marriage, had helped Brian lie to my face for months, had planned to show up at my home and sleep with my husband in my bed. But when I searched my heart for hatred, All I found was pity. Julia was 25 years old, young enough to believe that a married man's promises meant something. She would learn the truth eventually. She would learn that men who cheat with you will eventually cheat on you. She would learn that she had traded her self-respect for a relationship built on betrayal. But that was not my problem. My problem was figuring out how to rebuild my life from the ashes of my marriage. My problem was finding a new place to live, updating my address on 100 different accounts, explaining to my coworkers and friends and extended family that the husband they had seen at barbecues and holiday parties was not who any of us thought he was. My problem was learning to be alone again after 7 years of partnership. I closed my eyes and tried to remember who I had been before Brian. It had been so long that the memories felt faded, like photographs left too long in the sun. But somewhere beneath the layers of marriage and compromise and gradual erosion, she was still there. The woman I had been before I became someone's wife. The woman I would have to become again. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow I would start making plans. Tomorrow I would call a lawyer and begin the divorce proceedings. Tomorrow I would tell my boss that I might need some time off to deal with a personal matter. Tomorrow I would start the long, painful process of untangling my life from Brian's. But tonight, I would allow myself to grieve. I would mourn the future I had planned, the children we had talked about, the retirement we had dreamed of. I would let myself feel the full weight of the loss, and then I would set it aside and move forward. Because that was what I did. That was what I had always done. I survived. The next morning, I woke to the smell of pancakes and the sound of Melissa moving around in the kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the guest room window, impossibly bright after the darkness of the night before. For a moment, I forgot where I was. For a moment, I thought I was in my own bed, in my own home, with my husband down the hall. Then reality crashed back in, and I remembered everything. I checked my phone and found 23 missed calls from Brian, along with a series of increasingly desperate text messages. The earlier ones were apologetic. The later ones were angry. The last one, sent at 3 a.m, simply said, "Please call me. I'm begging you." I deleted them all without responding. In the kitchen, Melissa had already set a plate for me at the table. I sat down and forced myself to eat, though I had no appetite. The pancakes tasted like cardboard, but I chewed and swallowed mechanically, knowing that I needed to keep my strength up for the battles ahead. "I called in sick to work today," Melissa said, joining me at the table. "I figured you might want some company." "You didn't have to do that." "I know. I wanted to." She poured herself a cup of coffee and looked at me with concern. "Have you thought about what you want to do next?" I nodded slowly. "I need to find a lawyer, a good one, someone who specializes in divorce cases. I actually have a recommendation if you want it. Remember my friend Laura from book club? Her divorce was finalized last year, and she raved about her attorney. I can give you her number." I accepted the name and number gratefully, adding it to the mental list of tasks that seemed to grow longer with every passing minute. Find a lawyer, file for divorce, figure out the house situation, cancel the joint credit cards, change the beneficiaries on my life insurance. The logistics of ending a marriage were staggering, a bureaucratic nightmare that would consume weeks if not months of my life. But first, I had to deal with Brian. My phone rang again, and his name flashed across the screen. I stared at it for a moment, then answered. "Jennifer, thank God. I've been calling all night. We need to talk. Please just come home so we can—" "We are not going to talk in person," I said, cutting him off. "Not anymore. From now on, all communication between us will be through email. I'm contacting a lawyer today, and you should do the same." "A lawyer? Jennifer, don't you think that's a little premature? We haven't even tried to work through this. We haven't gone to counseling. We haven't—" "Brian." My voice was cold and flat, devoid of the emotion he was hoping to leverage. "Listen to me very carefully. I am filing for divorce. This is not a negotiation. This is not a threat. This is a statement of fact. The only question now is whether you're going to make this difficult or whether you're going to be reasonable. Silence on the other end of the line. Then quietly, I can't believe you're doing this. After everything we've been through together. Everything we've been through, I repeated. You mean 7 years of marriage? The vows we made to each other? The future we planned? You threw all of that away for a 25-year-old secretary, Brian. You don't get to act like the injured party here. She's not a secretary, he said, and I could hear the defensiveness creeping into his voice. She's an administrative coordinator, and she understood me in ways you never did. I laughed, a harsh and bitter sound. You're unbelievable. You know that? Even now, even after everything, you're still defending her. You're still trying to convince yourself that what you did was justified. I'm not trying to justify anything. I'm just saying, I don't care what you're saying. I don't care about your explanations or your excuses or your justifications. I care about getting out of this marriage as quickly and cleanly as possible. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to contact a lawyer today. You're going to contact a lawyer, and we're going to settle this like adults. Brian's voice shifted, becoming harder, more combative. Fine. If that's how you want to play this, fine. But don't think for a second that you're going to take me to the cleaners. I know my rights. I'm entitled to half of everything we built together. Half of what we built together, I said slowly. You mean the house that's in both our names but that I paid the down payment for? The savings account that I contribute 80% of our deposits to? The retirement fund that I've been maxing out while you spent your money on gym memberships and cologne and dinners for your mistress? He sputtered, searching for a response. That's not fair. I contributed to our marriage too. I supported you emotionally. I was there for you when your mother died. You were sleeping with Julia when my mother died. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear Brian's breathing on the other end of the line, shallow and rapid. That's right, I continued. I went back through your messages. The affair started in August. My mother died in September. You were texting Julia from the funeral home, telling her how much you wished you could be with her instead of dealing with my grieving family. Brian made a sound that might have been a sob. I didn't mean it. I was stressed. I didn't know how to deal with your pain, So you found comfort in someone else's arms. I understand perfectly, and I am never going to forgive you for it. I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but my voice had remained steady throughout the conversation. I was proud of that. I was proud of the steel in my spine, the ice in my veins. I was proud of the woman I was becoming in the fire of this betrayal. Melissa had listened to the entire conversation without interrupting. Now she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That was incredible, she said. You were incredible. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I'm going to call that lawyer now. The sooner we start this process, the sooner it's over. Melissa nodded and pushed her phone across the table with Laura's contact information already pulled up. I dialed the number and waited. It was time to take back my life. The following weeks passed in a blur of legal consultations and paperwork. My attorney, a sharp woman named Victoria, who specialized in high-conflict divorces, was exactly what I needed. She was practical without being cold, sympathetic without being sentimental, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting my interests. Based on what you've told me, you're in a strong position, she said during our first meeting. The house was purchased with your down payment, and you've been the primary contributor to all joint accounts. Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, which means the court will divide assets fairly, not necessarily equally. Given the circumstances of the affair, I think we can make a compelling case for you to receive the majority of the marital property. I nodded, taking notes even though everything she said was being recorded. What about the affair itself? Does that factor into the divorce? It can, Victoria said. Tennessee recognizes fault-based divorce, and adultery is one of the grounds. If we can prove the affair, which it sounds like you already have extensive documentation of, we can use that to strengthen your position in negotiations. The documentation. I had spent days compiling every piece of evidence I could find. Screenshots of Brian's text messages with Julia, which I had forwarded to my own email before leaving the house. Credit card statements showing charges at hotels and restaurants on nights when he claimed to be working late. Phone records showing hundreds of calls and texts between his number and hers. It was a comprehensive catalog of betrayal, and I felt a grim satisfaction every time I added another item to the file. Brian's attorney reached out within a week, attempting to negotiate a settlement that would avoid going to court. The initial offer was laughable, a 50-50 split of everything with no acknowledgement of the affair or the disparity in our financial contributions. Victoria rejected it immediately. They're testing us, she explained. They want to see if you're desperate enough to accept a bad deal just to get this over with. We need to show them that you're not. Our counteroffer was considerably more aggressive. I wanted the house, the retirement accounts, and 60% of the savings. I wanted Brian to assume full responsibility for his remaining student loan debt. And I wanted a public acknowledgement of the affair in the divorce documents, something that would be part of the permanent record. Brian's attorney called that offer unreasonable. Victoria told them it was actually quite generous, considering the circumstances. The negotiations continued. Meanwhile, I threw myself into work with a fervor that surprised even me. The furniture manufacturing company where I worked was going through a major expansion, and there were plenty of projects that needed attention. My boss, a gruff but fair woman named Patricia, noticed my increased productivity and asked if everything was all right at home. I'm going through a divorce, I told her simply. Working helps me keep my mind off things. Patricia nodded with understanding. Take whatever time you need, but if work is helping, then work is here for you. I appreciated her discretion. She did not ask for details, did not offer platitudes about how everything would work out, did not suggest that maybe I should try to save my marriage. She simply accepted my situation and made space for me to deal with it in my own way. At night, I returned to Melissa's guest room and lay awake, thinking about the future. I was 32 years old, soon to be divorced, with no children and an uncertain living situation. By any conventional measure, my life was a disaster. But there was also a strange freedom in the wreckage. I could go anywhere, do anything, become anyone. The constraints of my marriage, the compromises I had made to keep Brian happy, were no longer applicable. For the first time in 7 years, my life belonged entirely to me. Brian continued to call and text, though less frequently as the weeks passed. His messages followed a predictable pattern: apologies in the morning, anger in the evening, desperation in the middle of the night. I responded to none of them. When communication was necessary, it went through our attorneys or through carefully worded emails that Victoria reviewed before I sent them. The divorce proceedings moved faster than I expected. Brian, despite his initial posturing, ultimately caved on most of our demands. Perhaps he was tired of fighting. Perhaps his attorney had explained the weakness of his position. Perhaps Julia, who I learned through mutual acquaintances was no longer speaking to him, had made the whole situation too painful to prolong. Whatever the reason, the final settlement was close to everything I had asked for. I kept the house. I kept most of the savings. Brian assumed his student loan debt. The affair was documented in the divorce papers as grounds for dissolution. On the day the divorce was finalized, I stood on the porch of my house, the house that was now entirely mine, and watched the sun set over Nashville. 3 months after I caught Brian with Julia, I was a different person. Not unrecognizable, but transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The woman who had stood in that candlelit living room, watching her husband embrace his mistress, seemed like a distant memory now. In her place was someone harder, wiser, and infinitely more cautious about where she placed her trust. I had made the house my own. Every trace of Brian had been systematically removed, his clothes donated to charity, his books and electronics sold or given away, his presence erased from every corner of every room. I repainted the living room, replacing the beige walls he had insisted on with a deep, rich blue that I had always loved. I bought new furniture, new curtains, new bedding. I even adopted a cat, a sleek gray tabby named Oliver, who followed me from room to room like a loyal shadow. The process of rebuilding was therapeutic in ways I had not anticipated. Each small change was a declaration of independence, a statement that this was my space now, my life, my future. Brian had no claim on any of it. He was a chapter that had ended, a mistake I would not repeat. Through mutual friends, I heard occasional updates about Brian's life. Apparently, things were not going well. Julia had ended their relationship shortly after the confrontation at our house, disgusted by the chaos and unwilling to be publicly associated with a messy divorce. Without her, Brian had spiraled. He was drinking too much, performing poorly at work, alienating the colleagues who had once considered him a friend. There were rumors that he was on the verge of being fired, that his apartment was a disaster, that he had gained weight and stopped caring about his appearance. Part of me felt satisfaction at these reports. He had thrown away our marriage for a fantasy, and now that fantasy had crumbled to dust in his hands. He was getting exactly what he deserved. But another part of me, a smaller and more compassionate part, felt something like pity. Brian had made terrible choices, but he was still a human being. He was still suffering. And while I could not forgive him for what he had done, I could acknowledge that his suffering was not something I wanted to dwell on. I focused instead on my own healing. I started seeing a therapist, a kind woman named Dorothy, who helped me work through the layers of betrayal and grief. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during my marriage, people Brian had subtly discouraged me from spending time with. I joined a hiking group that met every Saturday morning, pushing my body up trails that left me exhausted but exhilarated. I was rebuilding not just my life, but my sense of self. One evening, about 4 months after the divorce was finalized, I received an email from Brian. It was the first direct communication we had shared since the settlement. "Jennifer," it read, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to say this. I am so sorry for what I did. I know apologies can't undo the pain I caused, but I want you to know that I think about it every day. I ruined the best thing that ever happened to me, and I have to live with that for the rest of my life. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what I threw away, and I'm sorry. Brian." I read the email twice, then a third time. Then I deleted it without responding. There was nothing to say. Sorry was not a magic word that could repair 7 years of marriage. Sorry could not erase the memory of Julia standing in my living room in that red skirt. Sorry could not give back the months of my life I had spent dealing with lawyers and paperwork and the destruction of everything I had built. Brian's regret was his own burden to carry. I had set mine down the day I walked out the door. That weekend, I drove to a small town outside Nashville, where there was a ceramics studio I had always wanted to visit. I spent the afternoon learning to throw clay on a wheel, my hands covered in mud, my mind blissfully empty of everything except the spinning clay and the instructor's patient guidance. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely wonderful. When I finished, I held a lopsided bowl that looked nothing like the smooth examples on the studio shelves. But I had made it myself, from nothing, with my own 2 hands. It was a beginning. 6 months after I discovered Brian's affair, I stood in the newly renovated kitchen of my house and surveyed the life I had built from the wreckage. The morning sun streamed through windows I had cleaned myself, illuminating countertops I had chosen and cabinets I had painted. Oliver wound between my ankles, purring contentedly, as I poured my first cup of coffee of the day. I was happy. Not in the giddy, naive way I had been happy at the beginning of my marriage, but in a deeper, more resilient way. I knew now that happiness was not something another person could give you or take away. It was something you built for yourself, brick by brick, choice by choice. My career had flourished in the months since the divorce. Patricia had noticed my dedication and promoted me to senior project manager, a position with more responsibility and a significant raise. I was good at my job, better than I had ever allowed myself to believe when Brian's casual dismissals had chipped away at my confidence. Without him there to minimize my accomplishments, I could finally see my own worth clearly. I had also started dating again, cautiously. Nothing serious, just casual dinners with men I met through friends or apps. It was strange to be single in my 30s, to navigate the rituals of courtship with the scars of my failed marriage still visible. But it was also freeing in a way I had not expected. I could take my time. I could set boundaries. I could walk away from anyone who did not treat me with the respect I deserved. As for Brian, the reports from mutual friends had grown increasingly grim. He had been fired from his job after a series of performance issues and complaints about his behavior. His apartment had been evicted for non-payment of rent, and he had moved back in with his parents in their small town outside Knoxville. Julia, the woman he had thrown away our marriage for, had apparently moved on with someone new, a younger man with no baggage and no betrayed wife in his past. I heard through the grapevine that Brian had tried to reach out to Julia several times after their breakup, sending flowers and letters and desperate messages that she ignored. He had become the thing he most despised, a pathetic ex begging for scraps of attention from someone who had already moved on. The irony was not lost on me. But I did not dwell on Brian's downfall. His suffering was the natural consequence of his choices, not something I needed to witness or celebrate. I had my own life to live, my own future to build. He was no longer any part of it. On the anniversary of the day I discovered the affair, I did something I had been planning for weeks. I gathered every remaining item connected to my marriage, my wedding dress, the photo albums, the cards and letters Brian had given me over the years, and I drove to a remote spot in the woods outside the city. There, in a clearing surrounded by trees, I built a small fire. One by one, I fed the remnants of my marriage into the flames. I watched the white silk of my wedding dress turn to ash. Watched the smiling faces in the photographs curl and blacken. Watched the handwritten promises of eternal love disappear into smoke. It was not angry. It was not vengeful. It was simply a closing of the door, a final acknowledgement that the past was gone and could never return. When the fire had burned itself out, I scattered the ashes and drove home. Brian spent the next year struggling to rebuild his life. Without a job, without Julia, and without the comfortable home he had taken for granted, he was forced to confront the full weight of what he had destroyed. His parents, who learned the details of his affair from family friends, were disappointed in ways he could not escape. His professional reputation was tarnished by the circumstances of his termination, and Julia, the woman he had risked everything for, never spoke to him again. I, on the other hand, continued to thrive. The promotion at work led to new opportunities and new connections. The friendships I had rebuilt became sources of joy and support. The house that had once felt like a prison became a sanctuary, a space entirely my own. Standing in my kitchen that morning, 6 months after the worst day of my life, I understood something essential. The affair had been devastating, but it had also been a gift. It had shown me who Brian really was before I wasted any more years on him. It had forced me to find strength I did not know I possessed. It had given me the chance to build a life that was authentically mine, unmarred by compromise or betrayal. I looked at my reflection in the kitchen window and smiled at the woman I saw there. She was stronger than she had ever been. She was wiser. She was free. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the stars emerge over Nashville, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. The pain, the anger, the slow and difficult process of healing. The revenge I had taken was not loud or dramatic. It was simply this: a good life, lived well, built from the ruins of everything he had tried to destroy. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all.